Today we're going to be talking about the Linux kernel controversies that are happening right now. We're going to be talking about Linus stepping down, and we're going to be talking about the code of conduct that has just come into play with the Linux kernel. Now, this is becoming a very toxic subject because anywhere you go, there'll be people shooting other people down for different opinions in a very aggressive way. And there isn't a lot, or there hasn't been as many rational discussions about this subject as I would have hoped. So I basically want to talk about these two things and the Linux kernel in general. I'm going to give you my opinion, and I would like to invite you guys to put your opinions down too. Just keep it nice and clean. Now, let's start with Linus. Linus is the masthead of Linux, of the Linux kernel. When you think of Linux, you think of Linus. This is because Linus created the Linux kernel, and he's been in that position for the past 30 odd years. It is his baby, and therefore he would be extremely passionate about the code that gets committed and contributed to the system. Now, I'm not one to talk about people without them having the ability to defend themselves. However, he has stepped down, and he has said in the mailing list that he is stepping down due to the fact that he wants to reassess his behavior. He acknowledges that his behavior in the previous years hasn't been great, and so he wants to reevaluate that and improve as a person. He said that this is a break, so hopefully he will return, and I do hope that when he does return, he will become better for it. Anybody who says that they are taking time off to reevaluate themselves, to reassess themselves, I hope that that will allow them to become more of a positive force when they come back. Now, he has been extremely brash and harsh towards people who have tried to commit and contribute to the Linux kernel. He's also been extremely brash towards other organizations around Linux. Just Google Linux or Linus and NVIDIA, for example. Now, one could argue that for someone who is in that position, the gatekeeper of the Linux kernel, you have to have that level of harshness, of shutting people down, because you care about the code more than you care about the person who is committing that code, because after all, it is the greater good. The Linux kernel is the thing that matters the most. Now, that's one argument. The other argument is that people will start getting turned off from contributing because they will fear the wrath of Linus. And this has happened. This has happened. People have removed themselves from the Linux kernel and have contributed their code somewhere else. And I've had witness to this as well for other open source projects. I have had discussions with other developers who have said that they would like to contribute, whether it's documentation or code or ideas or issues or anything to contribute to open source. However, they feared that they can't do that because they don't want their names to be shamed. They don't want their names in the mud. They just fear the maintainers. They're kind of like the big sort of guardians of this. Now, at the end of the day, the Linux kernel is the thing that matters. But to be fair, we're not just talking about technology here. That would work if the commits and the contributions were done in an artificial way. But we're actually talking about people and people's feelings. You're going to be less likely to contribute to a project if you're just being slanted at every turn. There needs to be a level of respectfulness. And there also needs to be a level of education. Now, I'm not saying that these maintainers should automatically take on an educational role, but I'm just saying that if your code is bad, then you need to be told why it's bad in a very constructive way and not just shut down. So that was Linus stepping down, and I do hope, like I said, that when he does return, if he does return, that he will become better for it in himself. The next thing I want to talk about is the code of conduct. Now, this is something that has just recently come in. It actually came in on the same sort of level as when Linus stepped down. Linus signed this off, this code of conduct. I should say that a code of conduct for the Linux kernel just never existed before. We had what was called a code of conflict. So what I'm going to do is just go to the browser here, and we're just going to take a look at this code of conduct and the removal of the code of conflict. So first of all, I'm going to show you what has been removed. So let's scroll all the way to the bottom here. And we can see that the code of conflict is actually quite small, but it gets straight to the point extremely quickly. So it says, the Linux kernel development effort is a very personal process compared to the traditional ways of developing software. Your code and your ideas behind it will be carefully reviewed, often resulting in critique and criticism. This is extremely code orientated. We put the code first. It's going to be carefully critiqued and carefully criticized. The review will almost always require improvements to the code before it is included in the kernel. So here we're saying, look, you can contribute, but just be aware that we're going to suggest improvements, or not suggest improvements. We require improvements before it can actually be added to the kernel. Then it says, know that this happens because everyone is involved wants to see the best possible solution for the overall success of Linux. Again, the greater good. This development process has been proven to create the most robust system kernel ever, and we do not want anything to cause the quality of submission and eventual result to ever decrease. And this is certainly true. The Linux kernel is fantastic, and it has been used in just countless places, and the process has allowed it to become that great. Then we've got the second paragraph here, which then says, if, however, anyone feels personally abused, threatened, or otherwise uncomfortable due to this process, this is not acceptable. If so, please contact the Linux Foundation's Technical Advisory Board at, and then it gives you the bits and pieces. So in these two paragraphs, what we're seeing is that we're putting the code first, and then we're putting the person's feelings second. And this is extremely laid out in a very black and white way. You know, we are going to tackle your code and your ideas, and then we'll consider your feelings. Now, one can argue that this has been this is the thing that you need to have when you have these projects of this size. This has been removed. This has been removed. The code of conflict no longer exists. It has been replaced with the code of conduct. So we never had a code of conduct. The code of conduct, in my opinion, is just common sense. And it's unfortunate in this day and age that we have to list common sense out, because this basically tells you how you need to behave to another human being. So we have a laundry list here of things that you just shouldn't do. So, for example, the use of sexualized language or imagery or unwelcome sexual attention or advances. Trolling, insulting, derogatory comments and personal political attacks, private or public harassment, publishing others' private information such as physical or electronic addresses without explicit permission, and then other conduct which could reasonably be considered inappropriate in a professional setting. So this is like a catch-all term. Up here a bit, we've now got our standards. So the standards are how one should behave. So now, we were told how we shouldn't behave, and now these are how you should behave. So using welcoming and inclusive language, being respectful of differing viewpoints and experiences, gracefully accepting constructive criticism, focusing on what is best for the community. Now notice this is saying what is best for the community and not best for the code. I know that this is a code of conduct, but remember the code of conflict that put the code first, that has been removed. Showing empathy towards other community members. This, in my opinion, is just stuff that one has to do just to be a nice person. If we scroll down here, we can see that we have responsibilities. Maintainers are responsible for clarifying the standards of acceptable behavior and are expected to take appropriate and fair corrective action in response to any instances of unacceptable behavior. This is a little bit weird because we're saying that the maintainers are responsible for clarifying the standards. Well, the standards should be what is laid out here, but that's nitpicking. I'll provide links to all of this in the description down below in the show notes, so you can go through all this. I'm not going to go through the whole thing. Now, I don't have any problems with this. I don't have any problems at all. If I was to go to a company, I would probably need to sign this. I would probably need to sign this if I wanted to join other communities. This is fine. I'm not going to not accept this. My problem, however, is the fact that the code of conflict has been removed. I don't understand why this part here has been removed. So where it's saying that the code is at the forefront, your code and your ideas behind it will be carefully reviewed, often resulting in critique and criticism. Well, that's just a fact of life, folks. I mean, that just is the way this works. So why has that been removed? So I personally don't have any issue with the code of conduct. It makes sense to me, and it's how one should treat others. And I think, as I mentioned before, that other people that I know are afraid to commit to and contribute to open source communities. Maybe, hopefully, this will allow them to feel shielded by this. And I think that is a great thing. I think that if you look upon this in a positive light, then maybe more people will start contributing. And that is not a bad thing. I mean, my problem with this is the fact that the code of conflict has been removed, and I would like to see it come back either in itself or as in a different form. The fact that we are now putting people's feelings first is fantastic, but we shouldn't be forgetting at all about the code. And you can put the code first and still be a nice person. There's no need to be a nasty person. You can just put the code first. Now, I mentioned earlier regarding the toxicity around this subject, and the further I delved into this, the less it was regarding the actual text within the code of conduct, which you would have assumed, right? You would have assumed. It's actually to do with the person who wrote it. And like, this is something that we all have to agree on if we want to contribute to the code, this code of conduct, this thing that has actually been physically written into the Linux kernel. The person who wrote it could be anybody, in my opinion. However, it was written by Coraline Ada. Coraline Ada is a known speaker. She's a known activist. She has lots of different viewpoints and so forth, and she has been, and she labels herself as a social justice warrior. And so you have a social justice warrior who has created the code of conduct for the Linux kernel. So as you can imagine, the internet blew up because people were annoyed and angry and outraged that a social justice warrior has been working on, contributed, created, whatever you want to call it, the code of conduct for the Linux kernel, the biggest kernel known. And the arguments are less about the code of conduct and more about the person who wrote it. And I don't think that is the right way of addressing this issue. People are saying that social justice warriors are now taking over the Linux, but let's just be clear here. Linux is continuing. Linux code is still being committed to Linux. this hasn't just stopped and paused everything. Linux will continue. In what shape, in what form, I don't know. But this is just saying how one should treat someone else. This isn't saying how one is going to go about reviewing commits or anything like that. That has actually been removed, which I personally think is a bit of a shame, because you want to have that barrier of entry to go into the Linux kernel. So what do I think is going to happen? What is going to happen with Linux now that Linus has stepped down? He's taking a break. Now this code of conduct is in play, and now the code of conflict has been removed. Well, you could fear that there will be sloppy code being added in. There'll be laziness being added in. But personally, I don't think that that is the case, because there are several very, very good maintainers out there who will stop that from happening. Linus obviously was the gatekeeper, and he is no longer here. I think that it's too early to suggest what will happen with that. And in fact, I don't think that one can measure the gravity of this until several years down the line, when something has been flagged up as a bug, as an issue, as a design inconsistency, as something that is architecturally wrong, because it has changed in a direction. The Linux kernel is at a fork in the road, I feel. And it could either go really well, or it could go really wrong, or it could just continue as it is, which personally I think I would like it to improve. I would like to have the feeling, the warm fuzzy feeling, that other people can feel like they can contribute more to this because they feel like they are shielded by this code of conduct. I don't subscribe too much that it's going to be taken over by social justice warriors. This is just someone with an opinion. And why should we shut down people's opinions? Or why should we not include them when they have different opinions to you? That is actually quite a nasty stance to take. That's quite a dictatorship. And let's face it, this is a community. It's not a corporate community. However, corporations do incorporate themselves with Linux. They use Linux. However, people come first, and then the code. Saying that, of course, the code that goes into Linux kernel needs to be at the highest standard. And we have lost a standard to reach. That is Linus's standard. And this is where I'm going to hand it off to you guys. What do you guys think is going to happen now that Linus has stepped down? He's taking a break. Do you think he's coming back? What do you think is going to happen now that the code of conduct has been in place? And what do you think now the code of conflict has been removed? Let me know. Put your thoughts down in the comments section below. Thanks ever so much for watching. Happy coding, guys. I'll see you again in the next one. Cheers. Bye.